the last time we spoke in February. Then we saw Sunday Igboho coming out to take a stand to defend his people from what he called attacks from herdsmen, the killing of farmers, raping of women, and invading of the people's farmlands. He came out to take a stand to defend his people. But what we have today is a situation where the DSS have claimed responsibility for raiding his home, taking responsibility for killing 2 people who they say attacked them, and declared Sunday Igboho wanted. How do you react to this?
Well, I react to what has happened on so many levels, including even reportage. For instance, going through the papers, one prominent and respected papers, there was a sentence which said, for instance, the government had moved against secessionists and other criminals. Now, that's a very loaded and wrongful expression. Would-be secessionists, and other criminals. How can you place the will or the wish for separation as a criminal act? That kind of language does not exist in the Constitution, doesn't exist in law. It should not exist in the catalogue of moralities, because it's not an immoral act or position to say that you want to stop belonging to an entity, or even you want to join another entity, because people take a very simplistic approach to so-called secession. Sometimes it just means I want to leave this group and join another group. And we've had examples like that before and after independence. The Ghana, Guinea Union, for instance. And we've had also, even after independence, the separation by fiat of Bakassi awarded to another nation. I mean, it was not just goats and cattle which existed there, it was human beings. They were not asked where they wanted to belong, but with a stroke of the pen, for certain political reasons, consolidated by succeeding governments, the Bakassi people were ceded to the Cameroon. And before that, of course, we had the plebiscite in the Cameroon region, in which a group, the section decided to go with Cameroon, another section to stay with Nigeria. So why on earth, in the name of justice, should anyone classify those who wish to secede or rejoin another nation as criminals? That's wrong, and that is playing the devil's game. It's playing the government claim. Why do I position? Look at the raid, this very bizarre raid, midnight raid, on a law-abiding citizen, which the government now says netted a number of illegal weapons, AK-47s, etc., ammunition. We're now in a situation where, of course, Igboho is saying that these weapons were not there, they were planted. Now, that's one aspect. We can deal with that later on. But more important for me was the position of the government, saying that the existence of these weapons, quote-unquote existence, in Igboho's place, proved that he was planning war against the state. Now, that position, that statement, very loaded statement, was simply to conflate, deliberately to conflate issues. It was to obscure the fact that Igboho and other people, myself included, have been decrying the depredations on the lives of law-abiding citizens, farmers especially, throughout the whole nation, Benue, Kaduna, Nasarawa, etc., and saying that it's time, and not just civilians. Danjuma, at one stage, called on the people, said, don't trust the military anymore. Defend yourselves, whichever way you can. and other governors, I mean, some governors, other voices like governors, have made exactly the same statement. Now, Igboho, even if he had those weapons, he's claiming that his mission was to liberate his people from the tyranny of squatters who now become violent overlords. And he has a good cause in that sense. Testimonies of citizens, farmers especially, who have been brutalized, dehumanized by these squatters who have acknowledged and identified themselves as Fulani, you know, that this decades and decades of this kind of anomalous situation in which the people did not receive the necessary, mandatory, and entitled defense and protection by the security forces, in which sometimes it is the victims who've been jailed, put in prison. There is a recent case in Ibarakba, for instance. We read the personal testimonies of those who were arrested and detained by the police simply for going to challenge those who were tyrannizing over the existence and raping their women. So now, you have a situation where a government is saying, oh yes, the existence of these weapons means that Igboho was planning armed insurrection against the state. So the whole thing from beginning to the end just stinks. The raid, the motivation has become very, absolutely implausibly, you know, degraded. And right now we're in the kind of situation which we have warned against. We called on the government to accept its responsibilities. And when eventually now citizens say, enough, we're going to protect ourselves, you say they are arming against the state. A language which we never used to describe or to accuse those who have been proven to be the aggressors in this case. So where are we, you tell me?
After raiding his home, the DSS had come out to say that Sunday Igboho is wanted and that he should turn himself in. What would you advise he does in this situation?
Well, my advice is not even so much Igboho, but to the government, that they should stop pursuing this person as a criminal. Because you have begun by acting in a criminal fashion against him. Because if and when Igboho comes to trial, I guarantee you it's the government which will be very, very embarrassed. Very embarrassed. So it's not even in the interest of the government. I think they should just tell Igboho, we made a mistake. We should not have acted in this way. You are no longer wanted. Please go back to your home. In fact, escort him to his home, you know, quietly, and let him resume his normal life. To declare him wanted. And again, this is another issue of language. I read in some papers, Igboho is in hiding. Well, but more accurately, he's probably just gone underground, you know, to protect himself and perhaps to be able to continue his declared struggle. I'm not talking now about the secessionist aspect of his struggle. No, I'm talking about what Igboho came out to do and which I believe is still his mission in this nation, to protect, defend his own people, and to let the aggressors know that they are not lords of this nation or any section of it, apart from what they are constitutionally entitled to. So I think the government, it's in no interest. If you bring Igboho to trial, you're just going to get mud in your face, clearly. As far as I'm concerned, it's up to Igboho to decide. He knows what the circumstances were. He knows what happened before his people were killed. And he's the only one who can judge, who can decide for himself. I cannot advise him.
Yes. The last time we spoke, Professor, you talked about the methods of Sunday Igboho and how that there were concerns around his methods and that there were talks going on and a lot of things going on, that we couldn't see, to make sure that in as much as he was standing for the right thing, that his methods would align with what is also right. So where are we on that?
Well, when you talk about methods, for instance, I want to distinguish. There are two very heavy issues on our hands at the moment, even though both allegedly bear the name secession. What Igboho stands for is not too dissimilar to what Nnamdi Kanu, for instance, stands for. The methods in terms of what we know, what is self-declared by these individuals, the method of Kanu, for instance, is very different from the method which we are able to ascribe to Igboho up to now. Not what the government is alleging, but up to now, Igboho has joined others, for instance, in holding rallies all over the country. There has been no accusation of any violence, none whatsoever. Guns have not been fired, houses have not been burnt. Okay, after he went and told this herdsman who was accused of things, told him, leave town, there's no evidence that he was responsible for the violence that followed. They claim that some houses were burned afterwards. But it was proven that all this took place after he left. Nothing has been able to touch to him in terms of violence. So we have that approach to what you might even call a meeting of minds. And we have to separate all those things, just as we must separate the principle of separation from whether we actually want it. Let me make this quite clear, because very often this is conflated and it makes discourse very, very difficult. It's first of all the issue of the right of a people to secede or not secede, to amalgamate or not amalgamate. That's one thing. And for me, that is incontrovertible. People are born free as individuals and as groups, as community. They have historic aspects of history which make them recognizable as one entity or not. And whether they have a right to move out or move in, that for me is a fundamental principle of human existence and even social evolution. You see, one begins to understand, for instance, why, very strangely, some people got up and stopped the teaching of history in this country. We recognize, we know for certain now, and it's become evident, that is because they don't want people to have a historic reference, even within their own society. In other words, if they studied history, they know that they don't even have to go back centuries. They don't even have to go outside to Asia, to Europe, whether you're talking about England, the Irish and the Welsh, or the Bretons in France, or the Catalans in Spanish. You don't even have to go out. That if you stay within your own history, you can elicit certain principles of cohabitation, which justify whatever preference you have at this moment. That's one of the reasons why, strangely, history was abolished. Now, that's one, the principle. Two, however, what do you and I want? Do we, as personal preferences, want to stay together, or do you think it's perhaps best that we should separate? That's a secondary issue. And as long as people keep conflating those two, positions will be mistaken, paths towards even achieving one's own preference will be blocked because of the emotionalism which is attached to staying together, this pietistic, theological concept of this is better than the other. Let's put that aside and talk about the practical issues. What makes it possible, rational, beneficial, productive, progressive for people to stay together or to stay apart? That then makes it possible for me to say, let us say to Kanu, listen, it is better we stay together. Given history, given the economic issues, given the geopolitics of our moment, etc., then we can actually talk. But there can be no discourse if you keep thundering against all evidence, against history, against contemporary realities all over the world, saying the sovereignty of Nigeria is non-negotiable. You're saying there's no discussion. And that's when people like Igboho, they transit from merely defending themselves against internal enemies, especially when they see that those internal enemies appear to be supported by the state, by the force of the state. That's when they then transit from that situation of direct, focused, internal obstacle, and then transit to say, okay, enough is enough, let's go. That's why I say we must distinguish between those two.
Yes, let me just ask you, Prof, straight on. Do you support the call for a Yoruba nation then? You personally, do you support the call for a Yoruba nation?
I don't like the sound of a Yoruba nation any more than I like the sound of a Tiv nation, of an Igbo nation, a Shikei nation. No. The reason is this. There are certain pejorative overtones, certain chauvinistic overtones attached to it. That's not the issue. The Yoruba, for instance, can say, and when you talk about Yoruba nation, are we talking about the creation of a Yoruba nation within Nigeria only, or across the colonial borders into Cotonou, into Republic of Benin, where you know Yorubas exist, and moving on to Togo, you know, even when you get to Ivory Coast, still see communities of Yoruba. So when you talk about Yoruba nation, I have to understand exactly what you mean. Do we even talk about the Yoruba in the diaspora or not? So it's a question which for me, which is not for me to answer at this particular moment. All I know is this, that on a sentimental level, and of course sentiment is very different from objective reasoning. On a sentimental level, yes, I would prefer us to try and mend and manage what we have, but under certain very rigorous conditions. And that is it.
What
the condition, decentralization. We have to move away completely from this constitution which was imposed on us by an internal neo-colonial force called the military. Now, if it had worked, if it were working, my position might be different. You know, very often pragmatism, as you know, especially if the results of pragmatism are positive, then we tend to say, okay, forget principles, forget, you know, the basics of existence. Why don't we go along the pragmatic way? So my conditions are very, very, if you like, non-negotiable. That we've got to get away from the present political arrangements because they clearly are not working. They are creating internal overlords. They are creating a skewed, a lopsided revenue sharing system. They are robbing these arrangements, robbing Paul to pay Saul, or is it the other way around? I've forgotten this expression.
Robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Robbing one to the other. So we haven't even reached that point of answering that question yet, because we can go in a transitory way and say, okay, let us take care of all the anomalies and then see whether people's positions change or not. But right now, what we have is not a nation, but a basket case. It's a real basket case, which is just shriveling and disintegrating all over the place, and all the contents are spilling over the basket. And all we're trying to do is say, oh, hold it there, grab it there, cover it there, cover that leak, and so on. A nation can't continue like this. It's obvious. And some people are more impatient than others. That's all.
Let's talk about the arrest of the leader of IPOB. How did you respond to that?
Well, Nigeria, for me, it's not for me to tell the government to prepare itself, because there's going to be a huge squawk when the truth about how Kanu was arrested, when the truth comes out. our nation is, people are alleging this and that and that. So that's one phase, whether Nigeria has acted outside international law. That's one issue. The second issue, however, has to do with Kanu's conduct outside the nation. There's been a level of hate rhetoric, which is, for me, has been most unfortunate, issuing from Kanu outside. But for me, hate rhetoric is an issue which can only be judged by the laws of any nation. So we come back to the issue, was it right to have, for me, quote unquote, kidnapped? You can say intercepted as much as you want, but I think that Kanu was kidnapped, and that is wrong internationally, and it's wrong morally.
Some critics have said that the federal government was fast to arrest Nnamdi Kanu, but when we look at other issues like the bandits still ravaging the northwest and some part of the northeast, the kidnapping still ongoing, and also the issue with the Boko Haram, and you begin to ask that how are they so fast and so quick to arrest? The situation with IPOB and Nnamdi Kanu and the others are still being left to go unchecked.
Yes, I'm glad you asked that question, because that also goes to the heart of what the issue we began with. Why do some people say, look, let's go our way? The government cannot wash itself clean of what seems to me a kind of comparative energy in pursuing the destabilizing, quote-unquote, forces in this nation. If I may take ourselves back, maybe you remember once when I threw a challenge to Buhari, and I said, what I expect from a commander-in-chief, from a true leader, and this is, early, in the sort of the malevolent activities of these groups. I said, what I expect, now that we've identified those who are killing farmers and taking their farms, occupying their villages, is to issue an order, give a deadline, an ultimatum, say that any illegal occupant of any villages, farms, and so on is given 48 hours to quit, after which the mightiest forces of this nation will be unleashed against them. No, it was ignored. It's because I said so. Many other people have said so in different forms. But I'm coalescing, challenges which have been thrown to this government, say, just show leadership where it is essential. And so when years later, a head of state comes out and says, we will respond to these people in the language they understand. Now, that is what I had expected him to say years ago, at the very beginning of the insurgency of the cattle people, especially as it was clear they were organized. And their leadership, the Maeti Allah, their leadership should have been arrested ages ago, long before IPOD was declared a terrorist organization. I have allied myself with those like Autumn and others who said that Mighty Allah should have been declared long before then a terrorist organization. And the evidence was there. A state governor passed a law for the protection of his own people and their productive means, their livelihood, their very dignity. And a group got up and said, if you don't rescind that law, we'll show you. You haven't seen anything yet. This is not an anonymous statement on internet. It was not fake news. The leadership of Mighty Allah actually threatened that government and have proceeded to put their money where their mouth is. Nothing has happened to them. We have not seen the same energy, the same deductive, organizational sleuthery mounted against these people. I'm not aware that even one of them has ever been called for questioning. And what did Igboho do? And they didn't even call him for questioning. They just attacked him in the middle of the night. I mean, illegally and constitutionally. So people are right to say there has been an unbalanced, unequal, and irregular approach to security enforcement in this nation. And why should anybody be surprised that one after the other, people are getting up and saying, all right, you cannot secure lives, and overtly, provably, you're clearly showing, shall we say, favoritism to one part of the community against another, whether you're talking about religion, in terms of religion, whether you're talking about in terms of section, ethnic section, whether in terms of profession or whatever, for any reason whatsoever, and say, oh, well, in that case, we don't have a nation. They have a right to say that.
And how would you advise the federal government to move forward? Talking about all this now, you've identified some pitfalls in the way that the arrest of Nnamdi Kanu has been handled, and also the way the DSS raided Sunday Igboho's house. For Nnamdi Kanu, for starters, how would you advise the federal government to move forward in terms of his trial and other things that will come up after now?
To answer that kind of question, we have to ask ourselves, what is the position mentally, spiritually, economically, politically? What's the state of mind, the collective state of mind of a vast section of this nation at the moment? And that state of mind is best described as distrust, total distrust. This government has earned itself, rightly or wrongly, that's for the government, that side to decide. But anybody who's telling this government that the people of this nation still trust it, I'm sorry, if the government believes that, it's really plunging this nation further into the abyss. So when you have this level of distrust, which will be denied, I know, there's only one thing to do, I think, to try and win the trust back of the people. And in political terms, it's called government of national unity as an interim measure, that's all. Interim measure, especially towards the next election, in order to have also a continuing confab, among those who execute policies, in order to also regain, of course, basically to regain the sense of participation, of involvement of the people. I know it's a very hard pill to swallow, but as I said, it's a kind of as an interim thing. During that process, you will structurally examine the Constitution. Okay, I know they're tinkering with it here, they're tinkering with it there, but then we've been going through that ages. There have been constitutional review committees under various regimes. And sit down, admit your inadequacy, because this has become glaring over years, even before the last election. As I've said over and over again, spoken intimately, very privately and very frankly to members of the government and the ruling party. And the distrust is too deep. And I believe that it's only a confab which operates through a government of national unity as an interim measure, which can actually just suggest, offer a sliver of hope for the continuity of this nation. So much damage has been done over the past few years, a lot of damage. I mean, it's visceral, it's spiritual, and it's pragmatic. You have a situation where, to cite some of the atrocities which people like Igboho try to remedy, for instance, you have a situation where this group of people who call themselves Fulani herdsman headed by Mieti Allah can go to that western corridor or your Okeo area, northern, they call it Okeogun, that place which I'm very familiar with. These are my hunting grounds. I know the people there very intimately. And raid, go there at midnight, kill people with impunity, burn, and till today, not even a statement of sympathy from the central government. I mean, what do they take the rest of us for, even if we're not directly affected? How do you expect us to continue normal existence when we read every day Bayelsa, all the way deep down Bayelsa, the herdsmen have struck. Banditry is a criminal, straightforward criminal thing. We can say before the security, before intelligence, before this, before that. But when a group of commercial people who, however, have been militarized are spread all over the country, multiplying their cells, and then people see policies of government geared towards encouraging and actually facilitating their aggressive penetration through attempts, legislation like what I call aggressive accommodation, like Ruga, for instance. And we see attempted legislation like the control of water resources throughout the whole nation. The suspicion is so deep. You see, is this centralist program, even as we are crying federal, regionalization, decentralization, policies are being mounted, some successful, some sneaky, which the nation may be not aware of yet, but others just shut down, you know. One notorious example, which I cited earlier, even taking advantage of a pandemic like COVID to try and control relationships between states. I hope you remember that when I actually spoke and I said, wait a minute, you can control the borders of the country, but don't touch the strategies of containment between states. You have no authority over that. We're not at war. That's what I said at the time. One stupid voice, responded to me and said, oh, we're at war. COVID is war. Somebody in the Americas said it's at war. I'm not talking metaphorically. I'm saying we're not at war. And therefore, just leave these very intimate control strategies to the states and mind your central business.
Let me just ask this question on a final note. Nnamdi Kanu, the leader of IPOB, arrested. Sunday Igboho, taking a stand to protect his people somewhere in the west, in Oyo State, Ibadan, has been declared wanted. What do you think will happen next? Do you see a situation where we'll have more Sunday Igbohos, more Nnamdi Kanus arising from the west, the east, the south?
We already have them. They exist inside, within, and they exist outside. Why do you think the security people are chasing the telephone numbers, using who are the backers? We're going to deal with those who are backing them. We're going to go through their iPod, iPad, iMam, and see who they've been communicating with. The next thing you know, they'll be picking people off the street because the numbers on their phone said, they've been talking to. I haven't spoken to. I don't even know him personally, but if somebody said I should have a chat with Kanu while he was in exile, yes, I would, absolutely. If he called me, I would respond. I would return the call. I would chat and discuss what he thinks he's doing. I would tell him, listen, stop all this assault on police stations. They are human beings. Why are you slaughtering them? Or why are you ordering your people to slaughter? Are you involved in that? So they're looking for sponsors everywhere. And so I'm quite sure that there are sponsors, there are people who support them. But we've heard this before. We heard about sponsors for Boko Haram. And we heard that, oh yes, we've got a list of them, and they're all going to be brought up in court very soon. They'll all be named. I don't know about you, but I haven't seen a name. I haven't seen anybody arraigned yet. Maybe it happened. I'm sorry, I'm not always there. I'm not au fait with whatever is going on, so let me not lie against myself. But I wouldn't be surprised if faster than we've seen the arraignment of the sponsors of Boko Haram, of the bandits, of the Fulani husband, faster than we've ever witnessed that, we will see absolute revolutions galore, accused, alleged sponsors of both iPod and Igboho, probably even their own relations. You will see.
So are you saying that Nigeria should, even if they're able to stop Sunday Igboho, for instance, stop Nnamdi Kanu, Nigeria should be prepared for more Sunday Igbohos and more Nnamdi Kanus to rise up and continue the struggles of this one?
I'm saying they're already there. I don't want this government to deceive itself. They're already there. It's not Igboho who's the issue. It's not Kanu who's the issue. It's a collective distrust, disenchantment, that's the word I want. Collective disenchantment with the conduct of this regime. And that's why I say it can only redeem itself, it can only reverse this downhill course it's embarked upon by now coming clean, trying to open a totally new page. Even forget the past. And let me use this opportunity to say this. And it's in response to some of the statements which have been made by some governors from a certain part of the country and some politicians. Nobody is saying that this problem began with Buhari. Nobody is saying it began with his government. Literally every president post the military era has committed lamentable crimes against the people, either through neglect or through action. Hardly any governor, any president is free of the charge of, shall we say, encouraging killings, massacre, for instance. Hardly any. Hardly any president is innocent of anti-democratic actions, very often avoidable, whether in terms of withholding revenues, which are mandatory for the various states, interference, or during elections. And I want to advise people, please let people stop making invidious comparisons, because if we want to open the chapter of governance malfeasance of every president we've had since the military was supposed to have left the state, we won't get to any productive, proactive, remedial activity. So I'm willing to say, let's just, push all that aside and say, how do we move on from here? And so I want all this business, we met this, and we do this by the self-excusing by Buhari. Yes, thank you. Take it for granted. You did not create Boko Haram. We accept it. You did not create Mayeti Allah. But what did you do about it? That is the question. Or what should you do from here on? It's the only way we'll save our sanity and also make the slightest progress. Otherwise, as I said before, all this language, all this discussion will be purely academic when, as the saying goes, hits the fan.
Professor Wole Soyinka, thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome.